Yes, it is. This is Dale Manette, as you guys know. He's very talented and gifted, and we're lucky to have him here. I want to thank the Friends of the Public Library for bringing him here and all the programs we got. Thank you for joining us. If you guys need anything, I'm in the back. So.
Can we cut some of these lights down?
Oh, sure. Is that too much? Or do you want to do like harsh?
That's good. Everybody see that?
Yes.
When I took that picture, the thing you can't see on this picture is about 20 yards to the left of him was a female moose. That's why he's got that look on his face. Last October, when I was putting this book together, I had a frog in the water with his eyes coming up out of the top, and I thought I'll use that for the cover of the book. Then I took this picture and I got it home and it popped up on my screen, and I thought, well, maybe I'll use that picture instead. But I worked at the Quabbin for 30 some odd years. Before that, I worked with Mass Wildlife. And I retired about 10 years ago. The day I walked out the door up there, I had a camera and I took some pictures, but I had no idea what was in store for me. I started going out and taking pictures, and one thing led to another, and then I started going and selling them at craft shows, and then it turned into programs that I did programs when I worked at Quabbin. That was what I did. And then now I got 4 books over there. So if you're interested, the 3 on the left, the bigger ones are $25, and the one with this guy on the cover, that is $20. So, okay, let's get rolling. A lot of people come up to me and say, geez, you know, how do you take these pictures? I go out and I can't see anything, and this is, it's patience. I will go out and find a place to sit, and I'll sit there for half an hour, 45 minutes. Sometimes if I've got a lot of things coming through, I'll stay 3 or 4 hours. And sometimes I'll go out there one day and I won't see a thing, and I'll go back there the next day, and by 9 o'clock in the morning, I've got 250, 300 pictures in my camera. So I do a lot of these programs, and I also sell prints, and a lot of people come up to me and say, you know, we like your shows and we like your books, but what we really like is the stories that you tell in your books and in your shows on how you got the pictures. So I decided that I would do a book with nothing but stories. So what you're going to see tonight, some of these pictures are in that book, some of them aren't. Some of the pictures are in that book aren't here tonight. So I'm going to run through. I've got about 100 slides, and I've got stories that go with them. A lot of people ask me what I use for equipment. It's all Nikon gear. I use 850. My main go-to camera is a Z9, and it has an electronic shutter on it, which means no noise. So I like that. And big lenses. I have a couple of 600 millimeter lenses. I don't bait the animals in. I let the animals find me, but sometimes I find the animals. I don't get so close that I make them nervous. If I do see that they're nervous, if they're feeding or something and they keep looking at me, then I just walk away and figure it's not worth it to harass the animals. So I like to start off at a fast pace. So now this is where the patience comes in. We're in the woods, we're waiting, we're looking down the road, and Jack Swedberg told me one day, when you're ready to leave, wait another 10 minutes, you might see something. Now, I wasn't sitting in the woods. That was a trail camera. And this is a sunrise in New Salem. I drive by this. I've lived up there since 1978. And this is the lookout as you go past the New Salem General Store on 202 on the right-hand side. There's a lookout. And I've taken 1 million pictures, sunrise pictures, and every one of them is different. So if you're ever up there at sunrise, you'll never know what you're going to run into. One of the first things that I started photographing when I retired was great blue herons. I love these birds, and I found a heronry that had about 12 nests in it. It varies from year to year, 10 to 12, up near the New Hampshire border. And the first year I had fun taking pictures, and then the second year I had more fun and I took more pictures. And then I decided that I would make a book. So I worked for another 3 years. It took me 3 years to get the pictures in this book. And I'd go in there in the morning and I would just wait and take pictures and take more pictures. And when I got ready to put the book together, I've got it so that it covers the whole season. But I must have 25 or 30,000 great blue heron pictures that I had to wade through. That last picture was the male was doing the shopping for the lumber. They come back to their nests in March. They mate for life. This is a pair of birds that had a nest blow down this past winter. And I took this at the end of March, and these two birds, there's 2 birds in that picture if you can see them. And they're building a new nest on the top of this. I don't use Lightroom at all. I use some processing it's an Adobe Lightroom. I don't have the Adobe Power, what is it? Photoshop. Mm-hmm. I don't use Photoshop. And a lot of times I just let the light do its thing. And these two, was early morning. They go through this little mating dance. The males will pick all the sticks, fly it to the nest. The female will put the stick where she wants it. They're a little further into the season. You can see the chicks. There's 3 chicks in the nest. And they do a nest change. When the chicks are big enough, the adults will stay with the chicks until they're about a month and a half old, and then they'll start leaving them for a certain amount of time. And then as the season grows on, it is less and less time that they show up for feeding. And this is one of the nest change. And if you blink them, you miss it. Here's one on the left was at the nest with the chicks, and the one on the right has got a gullet full of fish. It's going to barf in the nest. And you can see all the dust and feathers and everything flying off. I mean, it happens like that. This picture pretty much shows how fast it goes. As they get older, they get goofier, you know. There's 3 teenagers who wondering what movie they're going to see. And one morning I went in, and there was a juvenile bald eagle sitting up in a tree and kind of watching over the nesting behaviors and what was going on. And then it took off, and I didn't see it again for another week and a half. And I walked in, I could hear something going on. I could hear herons squeaking and all kinds of screeching noises and everything when I got in there. And this eagle was spreading terror around. There were no chicks. The eggs hadn't been laid yet, but he was going from nest to nest. And the herons didn't really really didn't want to play games with him. So finally he left. Another bird, this is also a heron. This used to be called a little green heron. Now they call it a green heron. And they are about the size of a raven. They don't nest in colonies like the great blue herons do. And they're showing up now. They're kind of late showing up. And this one thought I looked a little bit hungry, but I kindly refused it. I don't like fish.
Can I ask you a question about your depth of field?
Yeah.
It's incredibly shallow.
It's always 5.6.
Really?
6 ISO, yeah. Yeah.
Your focus on the subject is unbelievable.
I do a lot of early morning photography. I've got some otter shots and everything, and those guys are, you know, it's really, really dark sometimes. But herons, egrets, they preen all the time. And this particular green heron, in fact, I was in this pond this morning. I haven't seen any green herons in the pond yet, but they spend hours and hours preening, and it always amazes me how they can zip those little feathers together with those great big humongous bills that they have. This is a little blue heron. This is very rare in western Massachusetts. They nest along the coast and down south. I've got a few connections, guys that are really good birders, and they'll call me and tell me when these things show up. And this was up in Northfield last year. And just a couple months ago, maybe a month and a half ago, in Orange was this guy. It's a cattle egret, but it's a western cattle egret, which are another rare birds for this particular area. This is a great egret. It's a cousin to the great blue heron. A lot of people think these birds are albino great blue herons, but they're not. And they nest along the coast, the Cape and south. And in the late summer, when the chicks hatch and they fledge, they leave. They don't have their parental territories set up. They start wandering all over the place, and they come inland. And you can see them at Stebbins. I was down at Stebbins just up the road here a little while ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and there was 22 or 23 of them in there one morning. But I went into the power canal up in Turner's Falls one morning. I had seen them in there the previous day, and it was really foggy, and it was mid to late September. And I figured, well, I'll wait for the fog to rise. So I hung around a while, and they started appearing. It was very shallow, so they could walk around and fish in the area that I was in, and they'd come flying out of the fog. I mean, it was almost magical the way they would appear, and the light was just incredible. So I went away with close to 600 pictures that day. When I'm in beaver ponds, things slow down. I don't just pack up and leave. I start looking around. I take pictures of anything. And this guy landed in front of me. This is a common grackle. And it's got a iridescent head. But I'd like to know how it could get so many of these dragonflies in its beak. It one shot. Last year, I saw bluebirds building a nest just a little bit down from where I was set up. And one morning, the female flew in, and she sat there like she is on the bottom, just sat there looking around. And the male flew in with this great big dragonfly. And he kept waving it at her and kind of poking it at her, and she made no, effort at all to grab it. So he flew up 2 or 3 branches and ate the whole thing himself. This is a hermit thrush. They're early migrators up here. And in my yard, next to the driveway, we have this big red berry bush, and it attracts all kinds of birds. And sometimes I'll just set my tripod up and sit there 10, 15 yards away and wait for the birds to appear. And this is one that I took in my yard one day. And these are kingbirds. They're related to phoebes and least flycatchers. They're the family of the flycatchers. You can see this adult is got a big bug or something. And then the next time she came in, she had a blueberry. When I see things like this, I take as many pictures as I can, because I might never see that again. I was lucky enough to work on the bald eagle project in Quabbin in the early 80s. I was a student at UMass, and I was working part-time for Mass Wildlife also, seasonal. And I remember seeing my first bald eagle when I was 13 or 14 years old, and it's just been my favorite bird ever since. This was along the Connecticut River up in Turner's Falls. And this was just up the river. This is one of the pair that are nesting up in Arcadia at the East Hampton Audubon Sanctuary. I don't know if any of you have gone in there to look at them, but somebody told me that they've got chicks. They've got a couple of chicks in there. And I walked in there one day and I sat up and set up my camera, and the male come flying in, and he landed on the ground, and he was about 100 yards away. And I could just barely see him, and he kept bouncing up and down off the ground. I couldn't figure out what he was doing. And then finally he took off, and he had this huge branch. And he found it on the ground, and he was trying to rip it up, and he did. He took it, he flew right over me, and he went right into the nest. And you can see he's... There's the end of it right there. And she took it and put it where she thought it should go. And this is the pair of them sitting up on a high power tower looking out over the boat cove up there at the Oxbow. When they released the birds in the 1980s, the chicks, the way the program worked is they would buy chicks that Mass Wildlife, Mass Audubon, and I think the Bank of Boston was involved in, and they wanted to reinstate the bald eagles in Massachusetts as a nesting species. And they haven't nested here since 1906. So the Quabbin Reservoir had everything that eagles needed. Clean water, fish, plenty of peace and quiet. So what they did was they would buy chicks from Canada. The first 2 years, they let birds go. They got them from up around Lake Michigan when they were 14, they were probably 6 weeks old. And they'd fly them down here, and they had this big tower. And they'd put the chicks in the tower, and then they'd hand feed them and raise them up till they could fly. And bald eagles are like salmon. They imprint on an area that they grow up in. And it was thought that if they raise these birds at the Quabbin Reservoir, it takes a bald eagle 5 years to sexually mature. And that's when the head and the tail are white. And they, over 6 years, 7 years, they let 42 young chicks go. And that was how the bald eagles started nesting in Massachusetts. They started at Quabbin and they branched off to Wachusett Reservoir, and now they're up and down the Connecticut River, and they're in little lakes and ponds all around. But I go up to Cape Breton Island in northern Nova Scotia quite often, a couple times a year. And that is where the majority of the chicks came from. There's eagles everywhere up there. And I was on the beach one day, and this local birder started talking to me, and he said to me, he said, have you gone out on the Bird Island tour to see the puffins yet? And I said, no, I've been coming up here for 10 or 15 years, and I never have. So he told me where to go, and he says, right now the puffins are there, they're raising chicks. And he told me the name of the outfit and where I could get the boat. So I went down, I bought a ticket, and I got on the boat. And it was an old converted lobster boat, and there was only 10 or 12 people on the lobster boat. And it was a woman and her husband that ran it. And when she got on the boat, I noticed she had a bucket. And there were 10 or 15 long fish, and the heads were sticking out up at the top of the bucket. So I wondered what she was going to do with the bucket, with the fish. So it's a 7-mile ride out into the Atlantic Ocean when you come to these 2 islands that total about 2.5 miles long. They're very narrow and they're very steep, and the puffins nest in all these little cracks and crevices up there. So the woman was talking to us, and she was explaining about the geology and the tides and everything. And all of a sudden I see her look out the window, and she says, here comes one of my babies now. So she gets the bucket out and she takes a fish and she whips a fish out into the water. And this bald eagle came flying, and it was so close to us, we could hear the thwack when it hit the fish, and off it went. So I thought, whoa, this is pretty good, you know. They also had puffins there, but now I go up there every year, and I make it a point to go out and go see the puffins, but everyone else goes to see the puffins, and I go to watch the bald eagles come in and pick those fish off. And she'll unload 10 or 15 fish on the 14-mile trip in and out. And she told us that the eagles are so used to seeing it that they recognize the boat, and they're raising chicks at the same time, so they see the boat coming, and it's like, you know, the lunch wagon. A lot of times, if I get up in the morning and I don't know where I'm going to go or what I'm going to do, I just kind of let the car drive me around. And your car makes a great blind for taking, you know, photography shots from. You just want to make sure you don't get the heat waves coming up from under the car, because it'll make your pictures all look blurry. And this is a red-shouldered hawk I found one day, and he was hunting frogs in a small pond on the side of the road. And then I was up in Montague one day, and I saw this Cooper's hawk, and he was chasing small birds in a thicket on the side of the road. And this is one of our neighbors. We have a pair of barred owls that live around us, and we hear them all the time. And about a week and a half ago, I was getting ready to go out early in the morning. My wife came out, and she walked out into the living room. We have a bay window that looks down on our lawn. out to the main road that goes in front of us. We're on a country road. And she says, are you going to go out and take pictures today? And I said, I don't know, I'm thinking about it. And I said, why? And she said, well, she says, there's a barred owl sitting on the roof of my car. And I says, really? And she says, yeah. She says, come look. And I've seen them I have a RAV4 with a roof rack on it. And I've seen them on the roof rack looking out onto the lawn, but I've never seen it on her car. So I walked over and I looked down, and sure enough, it's sitting right in the middle of her car roof, and it's looking in the woods on the side of the driveway. So I happened to look over a little ways, and there was another one sitting on the mailbox at the foot of the driveway. So we had two barred owls hunting our yard that particular morning. But I love owls. And I chase owls around to look for them. And this is one, about 5 years ago, there were a lot of them along the Connecticut River. There was not too much food up in Maine and up into New Brunswick. So the birds were heading south so they could find some food. And they were in all the fields up in Montague. And this is one of them that I found. He wasn't too happy with me because I took a picture of him failing because he didn't catch anything. It's very hard to get a picture of a barred owl with the eyes, the color on their eyes. Their eyes are not yellow like great horned owls. They're dark. And sometimes you can get pictures of them and it looks like there's nobody home. And this is a post somebody put in the middle of the field, and this was a guy that liked sitting on the top of that pole. Division of Fish and Wildlife, they own a large area in north of the town of Orange, and there's a huge swamp in there. And it's the only place inland that cormorants nest. There is some dead trees in there. There were a lot of great blue herons, and the cormorants have taken it over. I was in there the other day. There's 8 cormorant nests. But I had been going up there in the morning, and I had been seeing great horned owls like this guy, sitting in a tree on the side of the pond. So this particular morning I was up there, it was really early, and I saw this guy sitting, and I took a couple pictures, and there's a swaley area in front of me, and I was up on the road, and I looked at the LEDs readout on the back of my camera, the pictures, to see what I was getting for pictures. And I looked up and he was gone. And I thought, sugar, I didn't see him fly. Well, all of a sudden there was this big splash right in front of me. And there was an opening. I mean, he couldn't have done it better. He landed right in the opening, and if he had landed in the bushes, I wouldn't have been able to see him. But I watched him, and he caught a Norway rat. And he sat there for a while, and then he took off, and he flew away from me. And there was a couple of dead trees that used to have heron nests in them, and he landed in one of the dead trees. You see the rat hanging down underneath him? So this is one of these things that I mentioned earlier that I'll probably never see this again. My camera was burning up. I was taking pictures so fast. So he sat there for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden I heard this blood-curdling scream, and this female peregrine falcon showed up. and she spotted him with that rat, and she decided that it would be better if she had the rat. And she kept flying by, and you can see the look on the face of the owl. He was ready to do battle. And that peregrine hung around for 5 or 8 minutes, and then it went down to the end of the pond, and I could see it sitting in a dead tree. And it was, I'm going to say it was 400 or 500 yards down the pond. And this owl kept looking around, and finally the owl took off and headed for the woods. And the peregrine falcon is the fastest bird on the face of the earth. And he proved it to me that day, because by the time this owl got to the trees, that peregrine falcon was right on its tail. And the owl went right into the pine trees, and the peregrine had to pull right up. But I'm pretty sure that they had a nest in there. And then my second book over there has got a snowy owl on the cover of it. In fact, it looks like this. But I took these pictures down in Satchewest National Wildlife Refuge down on the coast of Rhode Island. And when I was putting that book together, I wanted a snowy owl to put on the cover. And all of the owls that were around here, snowy owls only show up here in the winter. And they come down from the Arctic Circle. And if there's no food up there, then they'll come down here, they'll hang out at Logan Airport. Up at Plum Island, any big field areas, they think they're home in the Arctic. So I have a friend that goes around, him and his wife go around, they have 15 or 20 disabled owls, and they go to schools, they take care of the owls, and they talk to the kids about owls, how cool owls are. So I called him up and I said, hey, Mark, I said, do you know where there are any snowy owls? Well, he says, the only one I know of is down in Satchewest. So it took me 2.5 hours to get down there on a Sunday morning. So I rode around for 45 minutes through the sand dunes and the roads, and I didn't see it anywhere. And they stick out pretty good. So I decided, after an hour and a half, that I'd better head back home. The owl must have left. So I found the visitor center, and I had to go in and use the bathroom. And I get out of the car, and I heard this woman say, hi, Dale. So it was a friend of mine from Turner's Falls that was down there looking for the snowy owl. And I said to her, hey, where's this snowy owl anyways? And she points up at the roof, and it was sitting right up at the parking lot looking down at me. But I ended up staying down there till noon and watching him hunt. And this is one of the pictures that I decided it was come out so nice, I thought, that I'd put it on the front of the car, the front of the book. This is a great gray owl. These are the largest owls on the North American continent. They're common up in northwestern Canada, up towards the Arctic, and there's a small population of them out in the Tetons and in the northwest. But every now and then, one of these owls will turn up in New England. When I was in school at UMass, in the wildlife division up there, there was one that showed up in 1982 or 83, and it hung around a cornfield in Hadley. And the word got out that the owl was there, and people came from all over the place to see that owl. And finally it left. About 5 years ago, I got word there was one hanging around the airport up in Newport, New Hampshire. So I went up, and sure enough, this bird was up there. And This bird was there for probably, I'm going to say, at least a month. Their wingspan is 5 feet, 5.5 feet wide, and they have incredible hearing. The ears on owls, one is on one side of the head is up near the top, and the other one is down near the bottom. And it can help them zero in on prey when they hear it under the snow, under the grass and the fields and everything. And it helps them, figure out where it is. And they can zero in on prey under 18 inches of snow. They can dive right in. And I read a thing about them. I was reading about them the other day, and they've been known to crash through snow, crusty snow, that can hold a 175-foot man walking on top of it. If the owls hear something underneath with their claws and talons with so much power, they can crack right through the snow. But I went up there 6 times, and twice it wasn't around and no one had seen it. This was in the evening, and this is the late afternoon sun. Really, really wonderful owl. And ducks, this is a car shot. This is a ringneck duck, and you can see that brown around the duck's neck. You hardly ever see that. It's iridescent. The light has to be just right before you see them. Wood ducks. I was in a heron pond a couple months ago when these guys had just come back, and they were all vying for the females. And the males were chasing each other around. Incredible how they go after each other. These are hooded mergansers. These are males. And they nest like wood ducks in trees. They go in holes, woodpecker holes. And these guys were cruising for chicks. And this is a loon that nested at the Quabbin. There are close to 20 pairs of nesting loons at Quabbin. I am involved in the loon surveys through the summer up there. Because they're not endangered, but they're threatened in Massachusetts. And the DCR has a program where they monitor these birds. They're very territorial, and they nest in the same territories every year. And we call this bird Whitey because of the white feathers in the back of his head. And these are his 2 chicks. And the chicks ride on the back for probably 2.5, 3 weeks until they get pretty good size. And then they're in the water all the time, like these guys. Loons are very, they're very good parents.
What's threatening them?
Well, last year, there were so many loons at the Quabbin that they were having territorial fights, and so they had no successful nests at the Quabbin. But these bands, there's a guy from Maine. He came up with a way to mark the loons with these colored bands. And the outfit that does that is called the Biodiversity Research Institute. And loons have this habit of doing just that. They'll float in the water, they'll lift their leg up, and they'll wave it around like that. So this guy decided if he can get the loons and put leg bands on them and keep track of the band numbers, and not the numbers, but the band colors and what legs, the left leg or right leg, that they can keep track of them. So in the late 80s, they started doing that. And they catch the loons at night. I've gone out and helped with it. They catch the loons at night, and they cover the loon's eyes to keep it calm. They take blood out of the loon's leg. They check for lead, mercury. They snip some feathers to look for mercury, and then they let them go. And then when they see these bands, they can place the loons. They know where it was banded, and because I have a magic camera that takes 21 frames a second, I can get stuff like this that they can't see. It goes so fast. So that's my free ticket for a loon ride. So I always go out with them during the year. And then another real rarity that's more and more common around here, and they now nesting here, are sandhill cranes. These were up at the Royalston, Royalston bald eagle. I didn't bring anything to drink with me. The bald eagle reserve up in Royalston, Mass. I got a call that there was 10 birds up there that had sat down and they were resting. So I drove up. It was about a 45-minute drive from my house. So I drove up, and sure enough, there were all 10 of them. But there's only 8 in this picture. But about 45 minutes after I arrived, they all took off and they headed dead north. And oh, thank you, Brian. You know, I meant to ask you before I started talking. There's a story in itself. Thank you. There's a cemetery that I have a lot of relatives, ancestors, my dad, and I go in there quite often. And I was in there one afternoon, and I noticed that the chipmunks were running back and forth on the wall. Somebody had taken and put in a small bird feeder over one of the tombstones in the corner. And the feeder was on the ground. And the chipmunks were raiding the feed and hopping up on the wall and running it 30 to 40 yards down the wall. And then they'd come back and they'd do it over and over again. So I went out and I got my tripod and I got my camera and I set up right next to the wall, on the side of the wall. Well, they were going to fix me. They got about 10 yards from me, and then they went down on the ground. They went the back side of the wall, and they came up on the wall behind me and continued the trek. So I started moving away. And every trip they'd go until finally I was far enough away so they were going back and forth. So I kept watching them, and I discovered that they run the same route. They would take off on this bump right here, and they'd lift up and they'd land and off they'd go. And I knew, just like you know, chipmunks go like lightning. But try and take a picture of them. So I had the speed really cranked up, and I just waited. I took 350 pitches, I think, 358 pitches, and out of them, I had 25 pitches of the chipmunks in the air. Some of them were half on the ground, hadn't jumped up yet. You had to time it just right and hope that you'd catch them in the air. And out of the 25 pitches of the chipmunks in the air, 5 of them had everything in focus. the ears and the tail and the feet and stuff. So here's another one. But here again, I'll never see that again. And I worked in the Quabbin, I worked in the forestry division for 10 or 12 years. And I live up in the North Quabbin, and I see fishers all the time. And what I see is whoosh, gone. They're not cats. They belong to the weasel family. People call them fisher cats, but they're not cats. They're a weasel family. And they are one of the few animals, or maybe the only animal, that can feed on a porcupine. And they'll flip them over and they'll kill them on the throat, and then they'll feed on their gut. And I was on my way to a dentist appointment one day. I was going down the back road, going out of Wendell, and I saw this smaller animal, brown animal in the road, and it looked like a small otter, but I was quite far away. So when I got down to where it was, it had gone over the bank and it was up near the wall, going into the woods. So I stopped the car and got out, got my camera out, and I walked up the side of the road. And I watched the fisher come out of the woods, and it went up, it had a hole it was digging in. And I think what happened was a car hit a porcupine in the road. A plow came by and plowed the porcupine into the snow, and this guy was whiffing on it. And he was digging it. You can see the porcupine quills on the side of his head. And I took 25 pictures. And like I said, I figured this was the middle of the winter, and I figured that guy must be wicked hungry. He knew I was there. So I took just enough pictures so that I was happy, and then I turned around and I crept away and got in the car and drove off. I love coyotes. Some people don't, but I do. And I spend a lot of time trying to take pictures of coyotes, and sometimes coyotes spend a lot of time looking at me. I was watching a beaver pond one day, and there was a big field on the side of the beaver pond, and something caught my eye, and I didn't know if it was a fox or what it was, because it came right up out of the grass and then it disappeared. And I kept watching it, and finally I discovered it was a coyote, and he was hunting in the field. And I could tell where he was going in the field because the grass was quite high, because just I could see him where the grass was. And every now and then he'd come up. I mean, there was nothing I could do, so I just stood there. And all of a sudden, the grass starts wiggling right in front of me, and up he pops. And I had a 600 millimeter lens on it, and I had it headed right down in the grass, so it didn't take much for me to zero in on him. And he was up, and he come up and down so quick. I took 3 photographs, and this is one of them. I like to sit along the shoreline of Quabbin. Well, let me rephrase that. I used to like it. The water is so high now that it's right up in the woods. And I don't know, I don't do any hiking down around here. I don't know where the hiking trails are. But up in Quabbin, since COVID, people have they're loving Quabbin to death. And I don't find as many animals in the places that I used to go. And I used to have little animal trails that I'd walk into to get to certain places. And now people have found them, and people are in there, and it's just kind of took a little bit of wind out of my sails about going in certain areas, because I know if I go in there, I'm either going to run into people in there. I mean, the Quabbin's not mine, but but it's 18 miles long and it's 208, I've forgotten how many, 82 million acres in the watershed. But anyways, I was in there one day setting up. There was a frost in the fall, and this coyote was hunting. I watched him hunt. He was hunting mice, and he kind of disappeared. And about 40 minutes later, he spotted me. There was 60 yards between me and him, and there's water. There's a little bit of a cove between us, and he came around the corner, and he spotted me, and I didn't know what he was going to do, and he sat right down. I got pictures of him looking at me this way. I've got pictures of him looking that way, and I have seen this coyote quite a few times in the last 5 or 6 years. I forgot the year that I took this, but the following year, here he is again. His eyes, he's got I don't know if you can make, you can't even see his back, but he's got a big patch, a white patch on the back of his neck and his rib cage, and it's on the other side too. You can't see it here either. But he just kind of gives me the old stare, and then off he goes. This was last winter, a few months ago. The ice in the Quabbin didn't ice up much, but some of the small coves up north did. And this is something you don't see, this pelage, this color pelage in a coyote, this orangey color. Although, and this was off the Gate 35. I was talking to Gate 35, yeah, that's right. This was off the road up there. See how low the water is? And this was in a blizzard. I love going out in the snow. In the Quabbin, and I was in a blizzard one morning. It doesn't look at it; it looks like the sun's out. But there was a batch of them hunting. Here again, I was sitting up in the woods, and I saw this coyote coming down the ice, running. A lot of people, I don't have arguments with them, but a lot of people tell me they see wolves in the Quabbin. These animals do have some wolf in the DNA, but they're not as big as wolves. To my knowledge, Mass Wildlife's knowledge, there aren't any wolves in Massachusetts. Here is another trail cam. See the coyotes? There's a family of coyotes. There's 6 coyotes in this. You got to watch. You'll see them. There's some down in the ditch. Dad's learning them to hunt, either mom or dad. At least I think that's what's going on there. We'll see that again. They crack me up. But there's always one that doesn't learn. For all you photographers, always take a snack with you. And this is the way it works. The colder it is, the better it is. And the longer you've been out there, the better it's going to work. I was out there one morning, and I had been out there 2.5. It was in the early spring, and it was really cold, and I was waiting for coyotes, and I had some yodels with me. So I had my camera set up, and I decided it was 9 o'clock. I was hungry, and this works for me a lot. And it'll also work with a cell phone. So I decided it was time to eat. So I took my gloves off and I put them under my arm, and I started opening up. My hands were so cold I was having trouble opening the package, and I had shut my camera off. I looked up, and that was right in front of me. And I didn't even see it coming down the shore because I was so intent on getting the GD yodels out of the package. So remember that. And then a friend of mine sent me a picture one day. He texted me this picture, and I almost fell off the chair. So I called him up and I said, "Where did you get that?" I don't usually tell people where I find things, where I see things like this, but my friend, him and I share a lot of stuff together, and so he told me about this, and he told me where to go to find it. And I walked probably 2.5 miles down into the cabin, and I could not find it at all. Finally I found the bobcat. It was chewing on the deer hide. So it finally gave up chewing on the deer hide, and it started walking down the ice. And I followed it, and it took me right to the rib cage.
So is that a deer carcass?
That's a deer carcass. The coyotes had killed it, and but look at the expression on the cat's face. It's like, I can't believe I ate the whole thing. And then we have a couple of cats at home. They're indoor cats. We got them from a rescue. They're great. And the male is 10, and he will growl at things around the house. So one morning we were eating breakfast, and the sun was up. It was a pretty nice morning, and he was sitting at the back door, and all of a sudden he took off and the other one took off, and they went flying down the cellar stairs. So my wife says, "What was that?" So she got up and we crept out, and the bad windstorms we had this January, when people lost all kinds of trees and everything, we lost a lot of trees in the backyard, and we had a logging company come in and get them out of there. And there was a pile of logs in the backyard that hadn't been moved yet. And right on top of the pile of logs was this. So like a good wildlife photographer, all of my camera stuff was down in my car. So all I had was a 500 millimeter lens, and my Nikon D850 was in the house. Just so happened it was on my desk downstairs in my office. So I grabbed that and I threw that together, and the cat was, I'm going to say, it's probably 25 yards out in the backyard, and I couldn't. That's all I could get into the viewfinder. But they're beautiful animals. The first book I got over there, the Corbin book, this is the cat that's on that cover. And I was here again. He's walking across an abandoned beaver dam. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. The furthest thing from my mind was seeing a bobcat. So he went trotting through and down into the woods, and I took a couple pictures, and I thought, man, I'd like to get a picture of the cat looking head on, you know. So I waited another 25 or 30 minutes, and I figured, well, he's gone. So I was just getting ready to go, and I saw the bushes moving. I got my wish. He came right out of the weeds and said, "I can't believe you're still here." It's time to mark territories. Yeah, I'm the king. I love otters. Anytime I can find otters. I found this otter one day, and it had a kit with it. And I got to the point where they were going all around this big swale. It was really tough to take pictures in there. But I found this one log that was in the sun. And I thought to myself, if I was an otter, I would haul up on that log right there and eat my fish. So there you go. It was up on the log eating its fish. There you go. And the kit joined it. And that after the fish was gone, they wanted to give me a family portrait. The one on the left is, "Dale, is that you?" I would not want to get bit by one of these otters. The teeth, I actually watched an otter a week and a half ago. I watched an otter chew a small snapping turtle. And the thing that brought me to the point that I figured out what was going on was I heard this crunching noise, and I couldn't figure out what it was, but I could see where it was coming from. And I waited, and sure enough, this otter popped up, and it had this little snapping turtle that was about 3 or 4 inches in diameter. And it cracked the thing open, and I don't know what it got out of it. I've never seen in literature anything I've never seen where they go after snapping turtles. But I've got pictures of it with a snapping turtle hanging out of its mouth. And then deer are all over the Quabbin. I always have to take pictures of deer. This is the biggest deer I've ever seen in Quabbin. This was last fall. And it was in an area that they allow hunting in Quabbin. So I was really afraid that it was going to get shot. About 2 weeks after the hunt, I was in the same place, and I went by this tree, and I thought something caught my eye, and I backed up the car, and there he was. He made it. This is a story that in the book it says I made this bear famous. Channel 5 and Chronicle, they got me to be on their magazine show in the evening called Chronicle. They did one about the Quabbin in the winter. And I told them this story. I took them where this happened. In fact, it wasn't too far from where I took that beaver. I mean, the bobcat picture I just showed you crawling across the dam. I was in there watching the beavers in the lodge one day, and it was 8 o'clock. The beavers were done, and I was thinking about leaving. I had my 600 millimeter on my tripod, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to wait for otters or if I wanted to go home and do some work on my pitches, what have you. And while I'm standing there thinking, I heard this crunch and a snap, and then I heard kind of a little growl, a grunt. And I looked to the left of me, and from me to that door, maybe even closer, this bear was on the wall, there was a wall, an old wall that went through the woods, and it went down to the water. And I looked at the bear, and the bear looked at me, and I was really hoping that I did not see any cubs. If there had been a couple of cubs with this bear, I don't know what would have happened to me. But anyways, the bear looked at me, and it didn't move, and I didn't move. So slowly, I reached up, and I turned my tripod around so the camera was headed right at the bear. I leaned forward, and I focused right on the face, and I hit the shutter, and it went off twice. It went click, click, and the bear jumped off the wall, down into the water, along the shoreline, and went running down around, and last I saw it was going around the corner into the cove. And this is one of the pictures, and I told Ted Reinstein, he was the guy, the producer, and that was interviewing me about this, and I told him that, and he thought that was the funniest story. But it made it on national TV. I saw this female standing by this huge pine tree in a lot that had been logged off at Quabbin a few years ago. And I thought, I wonder why she's standing there. And I went by her in the car. So I got out, got my camera, walked up, and when I walked up, where I could see her again, she was standing on her hind legs looking at me. A lot of bears will do that. If they see her, they see me, they'll stand up and look at me. So she was standing up, and when I came into view, she dropped down on all fours, and there was this explosion at the base of the tree.
Oh my, oh my.
So I took, here again, I took a few pictures. She had my number, and I wasn't too far from my car.
Have you had any other close encounters with wildlife?
No, I haven't. I've been pretty close to moose when they've walked out of the woods on me, you know. People always say, I can't believe you're around all these bears and you don't carry mace with you, bear spray, but I don't. The thought has gone through my mind every now and then. I'll tell you this quick story. I'm running out of time here. I have a friend that has red squirrels, and he carries mace with him. He's 80 years old. And he told me one day, he said, he says, you should have seen me yesterday afternoon. I was so embarrassed. He says, I was sitting on the backyard, and he says, that damn red squirrel was eating me out of house and home. So he says, I came out with my can of bear spray, and I pulled the plug out, and I pressed on it, and instead of going out this way, it was going this way. Came up all over my head. There's a orchard in New Salem that had a lot of bears, and I went in one day to see if it was pouring rain, and I suited up, and I walked in, and this bear was in there waiting to see if any photographers were going to come in all suited up. There's another big guy that was walking up the road. And this study that I do, we've got 15 cameras, trail cameras, and every camera we had to spend $30 and buy a bear box for it. It's a cage, and they're strapped to the trees. And this is a film from one of those cameras. There's a cub trying to pull the camera off, and there's that cub up against the that's a scratching tree. couldn't resist. And then that's Rocky. Rocky was ripping off Mrs. Hillman's orchard the day I took these pictures. This is the picture on the cover. This is a young moose, obviously. The sun was perfect. The sun was just coming up when I took this. We keep track of the moose by the ears, by the antlers and the ears. See the crack in the left ear? He's got we call this one split because his ear is split. Can you see it? Make it out?
Yeah.
Deer flies, they're not deer flies, they're moose flies. They're specifically on moose, they drive the moose crazy. This is a 700-pound female moose in the water, and the only thing that's coming out of the eyes and her nostrils and her nose. It just drives them crazy. Here's another guy with a question mark up there on his ear. I took this in July, a couple years ago. The end of October, the same moose 2 miles later in a field. See the curlicue in his...
He's got some battle wounds, doesn't he?
Yeah, it is. That's what it is. These are just, there's some huge moose in Quabbin. They're not as big as Alaskan moose, though. They're a subspecies of the Alaskan moose, and the food isn't enough to sustain them and to give them the size that they are up in Canada. It's just a beaver that like to pose. I got a call one day from a woman, I got an email from a woman in Slovenia. And they don't have beavers over there. They were going to get for the zoo. This woman was the head of the zoo over there. And she had found my beaver photographs on my webpage and wanted to know how she could obtain 8 of my pictures. So I told her I would send them to her. And she said, well, how can I pay you? And I said, no, I don't want to get paid. I'm happy to have pictures over there in the zoo. So the 2 pictures on the bottom left are mine. And then on the second row on the right, the second one in on the left. And there's 3 other of these signs that have the other pictures on it. So if you're ever in the Lubizana Zoo, look up Petra and tell her you're a friend of mine. And I always like to leave the same way I came in. And remember, if you're not first, you're last. That's it. Any questions? Any questions? If I don't know the answers,
Is the tower
I make up
where they
crap.
raise those eagles? Is that
Yeah.
still up somewhere?
No, that tower's been gone. Right after they did it, it came down. The book with the owl on the cover, it's got the whole story in it. And I went back and found some of my slides and I digitized them, and so the whole story is in that book.
Your pictures are a gift, and to be out there for as long as you are, you got to be comfortable. How do you dress? What are your go-to pieces of clothing that you swear by?
Well, in the winter, I have a Patagonia parka. that I paid all outdoors for. My friend Mark, the owl guy, calls it a Patagucci. And that keeps me really warm. It's got a hood on it, you know. Like this morning, I didn't really need much of anything. I just had a regular shirt on. But then I get eaten by mosquitoes. So they make what you call a bug shirt. It's really light, and it's a screen that comes down over your face, and you can look through binoculars. And I don't like using that, but sometimes you gotta, you know. You're right. I mean, I just make sure that I'm comfortable, and sometimes I'll stay out there from, well, like now the sun's coming up in the morning at 20 minutes to 6, so I'm out the door at the crack of dawn and then some. But yeah, it's just and like I said, you got to have patience. A lot of people just, I tell that to them, and they say, well, how long do you have to wait? And I'll tell them, and, well, that ain't for me. You know, but I get a lot of requests from my webpage for people to take them out with me. And as a policy, I really don't do that because I never know where I'm going to go. Sometimes I do, but most of the time I don't. And if you're talking with somebody, you're not gonna, nothing's gonna show up. I mean, I find that when I go in, it takes 15 to 20 minutes for things to kind of settle down. Because sometimes I'll go in with a headlamp on. I'll walk in the morning and I'll get all set up. So I'm there when everything comes to life. But if I end up at 8 o'clock in the morning, then I set up and then I just kind of stand there, and you can almost feel it settling down. You know, you can feel the birds starting to sing again, and so you got to be pretty tuned to it, you know. And a lot of guys, you know, well, Wick, and you know, if I'm at such and such a pond around 2 in the afternoon, do you think I'll see a moose? You know, and I say, hey, you know, I can't answer that. They're wild animals, and sometimes I find them, and sometimes they find me. You know, so. Well, hey, I want to thank you for coming down. It's been a lot of fun.